George, let's get started. Is it possible to pin down the exact point in time when you became consciously aware that you could make people laugh?
Well, it would be over a period of my childhood. Pinpoint would be hard to do. But I would say my mother, when I was young, when I was still before the age of 6, my mother worked in an office, and she taught me this thing called the Big Apple, which was a dance craze of the late 30s. And you put your finger up in the air and you kind of dance a little. And she taught me to do that. And when I would go to her office to visit her, when she would bring me there, and the other girls would be sitting around, she would coax me and have me do the Big Apple. And I think that even at that early age, and I was probably 3 or 4 then, I noticed that this process of doing something for people pleased them, and you gained some feeling of approval from it. Now that grew into doing little imitations that I could do that my mother taught me, again, of people I never saw. She taught me to say, "Come up and see me sometime," like Mae West, but I had never seen Mae West, nor did I know anything about her. I imitated what my mother showed me. Then I learned a little later to imitate Johnny the Philip Morris midget, singing, "Call for Philip Morris." And these were just about my A material of the time. That was my first show. And then I, on my own, as I grew up through the rest of my 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, learned that I could do things that gained approval, attention, applause, approbation. All these A's that I never got in school, I got by acting out for people.
How long after that do you figure you decided or made a conscious decision that you wanted to do it for a living?
Well, I can pinpoint one thing, which means it came before this date. This was in 5th grade, when we had to, now 5th grade I was 11 years old. We had to write an autobiography. Naturally, 5th grade I think is a good time to look back over one's life and sum up. So we wrote these little autobiographies. And the last page, we were supposed to tell what we thought our futures would be like, or what we wanted them to be like. And I said on mine that I wanted to be either an actor, impersonator, announcer, comedian, or trumpet player. And it was clear from that to me that I wanted attention, that I wanted to stand in front of people and do something that gained their approval.
You say it was clear to you. You feel that you understood even at that time,
Yes.
or you?
No, I understood at that time, or I wouldn't have used all 5 things like that. I would have thrown in boxer
You
or
became
policeman.
consciously aware. You say, "Hey, I think I need attention."
Yes, I think I like this process. I don't know how much of... I know needing attention was part of it because my father was not present in the home. My mother was not there because she worked all day. Children don't interpret that as in reasonable terms. They say, "Hey, nobody's here. What's going on? What's wrong with me?" So I learned that I could gain people's attention and approval. It's necessary that you take that step, the next step, because you can get people's attention by throwing yourself through a window too. But I found that I could have them say, "Oh, isn't he cute? Isn't he clever?" Clever was the word my aunt always used. "He's so clever." Well, I found out later clever is what they call criminals and things. But clever has that. And or the lady who used to take care of me when I was real young called me cunning. He's cunning. And again, that's a word with a negative aspect to it. But they used it positively, and I was aware at that age. See, I was 11 then. I know that at 10 years of age, I saw Danny Kaye in movies and wanted to be like Danny Kaye. I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be in the movies. I'm going to be making people laugh. I'm going to be using my voice the way he does.
Beside the example of Danny Kaye, were there any other events in your early life that you feel helped to shape your approach to comedy?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think at that time it was still a question of comedy becoming paramount to me. The radio comedians. I grew up at the tail end of the golden age of radio and before the beginning of the golden age of television, right on the cusp. And for me, the radio comedians I listened to them, every one of them who had a show when they didn't compete with one another. I listened to them. I liked comedy. I liked what it did to me.
Any of those specific people that impressed you, or that you thought, any specific names?
Yes. First of all, Fibber McGee and Molly, Amos and Andy, Charlie McCarthy, Edgar Berg and Charlie McCarthy, Fred Allen. I didn't listen much to Jack Benny. I think he must have been on opposite something I liked better. The Bob Hope Show, which was a variety but a lot of comedy in it. Bing Crosby had a show, which again had a lot of comedy in it. And then there were these light comic, not soap operas, but these series like Henry Aldrich, Date with Judy,
The radio sitcoms.
Yeah, the radio sitcoms is exactly what they were. If you'll put these on pause for a minute, I have a piece of research of my own. There were other things at that time, besides the radio comedians, that helped me, that now let me know that's where I was headed. There was a magazine called Thousand Jokes. I never missed an issue of that. There was a satiric magazine that only lasted a short time, Ballyhoo, which I used to get. I got Mad Comics when they were comics, Panic Comics when they were still comics. Panic then became a magazine. There was another magazine called Help. Harvey Kurtzman and these guys drifted around. And
so your interest in comedy was more than whetted. It was, you began to have a serious desire, a serious need, a serious,
yes.
To go after these things.
Right.
That was comic.
Yes. Esau's Comic Dictionary, another one.
One of the greats.
So, wow, boy, look at it. A sax is a wind that nobody blows good. An ill wind that no one blows good. All that kind of stuff. I mean, it was just as if I couldn't get my hands on enough raw material. I just wanted to...
So we're talking about the formative years
yes.
now. We're talking 8, 9, 10, 11, 12
That's
years
right.
old.
That's right.
When you teamed up with Jack Burns,
yes.
You once again did radio.
Yeah, I was still in radio at the time, and my plan to leave radio and become a comedian was not anywhere near fruition yet. I hadn't done it yet. I hadn't gone out and tried it.
Well, when you got together with Jack,
that made it happen.
Right, you did you still did a radio show together.
Yes, we
it was
did.
A comedy radio show.
Right.
And then you went out and started doing some dates.
Right.
Right.
I'm going to unplug that. Jack and I were working in Fort Worth. He had come down from Boston, where we had met one another, and I had left and gone to Fort Worth. He came down from there, driving out to Hollywood, stopped in, got a job that just had opened up the day before at our station. We roomed together for about 3 or 4 months, and after the shows at night, I got off at midnight, he was the nighttime newsman, we would go down to an after-hours coffee house in Fort Worth called The Cellar. This was the tail end of the beatnik era, and these people still thought they were all beatniks. And there were some true beats there. And we would improvise a 2-man act. We'd work up little ideas in our room during the day, and at night we'd go down there and improvise an act based on these ideas. And it was kind of raunchy. It was pretty raunchy. But based on our success with those people, we didn't get paid. They gave us free liquor. It was a coffee house, but they put liquor in coffee cups. This was the place where Kennedy's Secret Service people spent the night before his assassination, where the infamous drinking party took place that the Secret Service agents were at, the Cellar in Fort Worth. Based on this limited success with this captive audience who knew us and were half drunk, we quit radio and drove to California on spec.
Well, you came to California. How much of an act did you have? 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
We probably had 15 minutes.
Of material that you had worked on and polished and at least was getting laughs
yes,
for you.
Polish is a very loose word at this stage,
yeah.
but yes.
But you felt secure enough
we
to...
felt secure enough to quit radio. And the guy said, he says, you'll be back. He said, other people have quit this station and thought they were going to Hollywood. You guys will be back. He didn't talk like that. He was
All right, so you arrive in Hollywood,
right.
And now the two of you are out and you're picking up gigs, whatever.
Yeah, after lying on our ass for about a month, our money was stolen. We had to get back into radio here, which we did for 3 months. And at the same time got a job at a place called Cosmo Alley, a coffee house, and started working there. Lenny Bruce came in to see us, Mort Saul came in to see us, thanks to our manager, Murray Becker. And Lenny got us a GAC contract, and Mort spoke up for us at a couple of places, and we were launched, so to speak. We also made an album after being in the business only for 3 weeks. We made an album.
Were you able to create, come up with enough material at that point?
We kept adding things. Yeah, we were fairly fertile. You know, the stuff. Later on, it wasn't that way. I wanted to be a single. I wanted to get away, and
Well, right around this period, George,
Yeah.
when you made the transition from being on radio to doing an act in front of an audience,
Yeah.
what were some of the new techniques that you had to learn being face-to-face with an audience that you couldn't possibly have known or done being face-to-face with a radio microphone?
Well, it was more like what I was used to in my neighborhood. I was quite a street corner clown in my neighborhood prior to. This is what let me know prior to my radio experience and why I had that plan at 15 to be a comedian, because I could make up things about the people in our neighborhood. I used to have like about a 30 or 40-minute act in my neighborhood that I would do on the stoop, not all at once. They'd say, "Hey, Georgie, tell me the story about Artie Lips coming out of the bar and then Margaret's outside." And I would just improvise this stuff about characters in my neighborhood. I had about 10 or 12 people whom I imitated, and I knew all of their salient points of their characters and so forth, and I would make up things. I made up a whole story about all the priests going to Coney Island on a drinking party. And so I was used to having people in front of me, even in small groups on the neighborhood, and getting laughs and being on the tightrope, having to survive from laugh to laugh.
Well, what about the technical things, simple like handling a microphone, being up and under the lights?
I don't remember a lot about that, Larry. There were two of us, and we had that safety of two guys up there, so that you didn't ever have the feeling that, oh, the world is on my shoulders. It was a shared thing. Working a microphone, working a room where it's not all your friends sitting around is another thing. The first 4 weeks we spent was in a coffee house here in Hollywood, which was fairly, they were fairly nice to you. Later on came the saloons and the nightclubs where some of them were drunk or some of them were indifferent. They didn't even come to see the headliner.
How long after you had worked with Jack did you make the decision that you wanted to go it alone?
Well, about a year after we got together, about a year after we began the nightclub work, I married Brenda. I met her within that year and was engaged to her during that year, and then we got married. And I had begun by then to think more seriously about my own future and my trip, whatever it was going to be. And I knew I was going to be a single. And I'd say halfway. Jack and I stayed together 2 years. I'd say about halfway during that time, I began to think about it more seriously. And I was pretty open with Jack about it the whole time. In fact, before that second year was up, I was in Dayton, where Brenda was from, where I met her. Jack and I were off. He was in Boston. I was hanging around with Brenda in Dayton. Peter, Paul, and Mary were scheduled to come into the club where she worked, the Racket Club, where I met her. And Peter had some illness, and they couldn't make it, and they had 2 nights open. And I was pressed into service. And this was very unexpected. Now, so I took material of Jack's and mine that I was able to do single-o, and I took some other things I had been preparing for myself and managed to get through 2 nights of it. So that's a sign that I was ready.
Right. This material at this particular stage of your career, is this what one would frame common denominator comedy? Was it something that appealed to the masses?
No. With Jack and I, and the stuff I did coming out of Jack and my time together, was, for its time, very topical and had an edge, had a political commentary involved in it. We took stands, we took positions, we did jokes about racism, about the Ku Klux Klan, about the John Birch Society, about religions and fringe religions, about charities and how they are not all on the up and up. We had a routine called Captain Jack and Jolly George, which is about giving kids heroin kits.
Well, we're not talking Henny Youngman jokes now. We're talking some sophisticated material.
Yeah, we felt connected to that sort of that movement that was starting then, that Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul had certainly been the best exponents of, and that other young people were trying to do coffee house comedy more than nightclub comedy.
Okay, so you get out on your own and you start doing your own material and so forth. Now, certainly, well, I shouldn't decide that. was the material you began to do as a single and begun and done well enough, obviously, to get you into Vegas now.
Yeah.
Was that the same kind of material?
No, there began to be a change. I came out of coffee houses. Even though Jack and I worked a lot of, quote, nightclubs, we were more or less coffee house-oriented act. And
The coffee house audience were made up of...
Well, they had a more intellectual bent. They weren't all intellectuals, obviously, but there were people who liked jazz and folk music. They were generally left-wing politically and appreciated risk-taking in an act of any kind.
Okay, and a lot of college people?
College, yes.
Okay.
And college and the college-informed kind of intellect,
Fine.
post-college.
Okay, go on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So we came out of that, and we did a lot of nightclubs too. See, we worked the Playboy circuit, which is certainly the total antithesis of coffee houses. Now, so when Jack and I broke up, I took over these, because he didn't want to do a single, I took over these Playboy dates. And I took over and did certain nightclub situations that Jack and I had, where I was able to go back as a single. And I didn't do much coffee house stuff. And then I hit a kind of a dip. Now, this is 63 and 64. And I felt I had to take a stand somewhere. And I felt I had to find a spot in New York, which I did, the Cafe Au Go-Go on Bleecker Street. And I stayed there for like 2 years, even though I traveled some, and I went to other little places. On and off, I spent about 2 years in that place, a week at a time, a month at a time, 2 days at a time, off for 7 days, on for 12 days, off for 3 months, back for 2 months, all this stuff, just trying to work, use it as a laboratory. And to get my little piece together for Merv or Mike Douglas. Those were the entree shows. You didn't jump right to the Tonight Show. That wasn't as simple. You had to have some a little bit of background, even though you were unknown, to get on there. But as far as Merv was concerned, he would take brand new people, and Mike Douglas was sort of like the same situation in Philadelphia. I hung around the Cafe Au Go-Go through 1965. I got my Merv interview in May '65. And in July '65, I was on his show. So 63 and 4 and 5, I did a lot of club dates. I did a lot of, $50 for Brown's Hotel in the Catskills, the Music Teachers of Suffolk County, all this kind of one-nighter, what we, as you know, call club dates. I also did an occasional week at a nightclub out of town where I could afford to go, and then where I wouldn't spend as much to get there as I would make. But I stayed around New York, and I stayed in that atmosphere, and I worked on my act. And I was aiming toward television. So the material, answering this question now, the material's orientation toward confrontation and politics, which I had a little earlier, began to soften and become diluted because I was looking for the mass audience through television.
In order to appear on television, you had to
in order to further my career, because acting was at the back end of this whole load when I was 15.
This slow but sure departure from
Yeah.
the unusual, the different, the
Yes.
intellectual into more of the common
Broad,
denominator
yeah.
or broader, slowly but surely led you to the better clubs and then eventually led you to Las Vegas.
The television got me to the better clubs and Vegas, right.
Which leads us. There have been a lot of accounts, different accounts about that appearance at the Frontier.
Yes.
What happened, how it came about, that you had it planned. I'd like you, if you would,
Yeah.
to set the record straight.
Okay.
Once and for
Let me give you the exact dates, too.
all. Okay.
Okay? That I can put my hands on. A lot of auditions for movies and stuff, and I'm doing a lot of television.
66, 67, and 68.
Yeah, 66 is when my network stuff started.
Okay.
And then 69 shows up, and I begin to change. I begin going through and saying, okay, the ass thing. All right, in October 69 at the Frontier, I closed after one show. This was the incident where I said the word ass on stage. Now, there were two separate incidents. In this one, the golf people had Robert Mayhew and these Hughes people, the golf assholes I call them, they had a golf thing, and they all came early, and I had to do my show early, and they were all drunk from their 9th hole and all, whatever the hell, the 19th hole. So I did this thing where I said about my ass. I said, I ain't got no ass. You'll notice I don't got no ass. Some guys got a bigger ass, some guys got smaller ass. I ain't got no ass. Guys in the service, you say, hey, George, where your ass? That ain't got no ass. For that, in 1969, I was canceled. and I had a 1 year to go on my contract. So it was just that they paid me off for that job.
In other words, you had a contract for more than one more than one
I
date.
had a 2-year contract.
Really, at
Right.
the Frontier. You had already played several dates prior to that?
Yes, let me see if I had now. Yeah, there's a Frontier back in April of that year. So I had been there before, and I was making $10,000 a week, which was fabulous, and still is fabulous. Frontier Hotel closed after one show on that, one show on the 23rd. Okay, so I had been there 2 weeks. I had a week to go. They closed me after the early show that night, and that was because of ass. And they just said, we'll pay you off for the rest of that week. You're through for this engagement. Now, the following year, I came back. In 1970, I was there in August, and my money was up, I'm happy to say, and I closed after one show on the 25th. Okay, I was there about 3 weeks, and that was the night I said, shit. And what I said on that show was, I said, you know, some people say shit. Buddy Hackett says shit. Red Fox says shit. I don't say shit. I'll smoke a little of it, but I don't say it. That was everything I said. For that, I was fired.
So the first time, after firing you because you used the ass phrase, they were still willing to take you back again.
Yes.
Now, did they say, now look, George, we don't want you to do any of that stuff before? Was that kind of...
I got to assume that. I think what the first one was more of a thing of where their prestige was on the line with these other people in their eyes.
Okay.
And they felt they had to take an action. I imagine there was some talk to me. I don't remember it.
There are some critics, George, over the years that have said that you and Lenny did more or less the same kinds of jokes about the Catholic Church, and others that have stated that your material is more hard-hitting and bitter than Lenny's. Which analysis do you feel is correct?
Well, I don't know that. I think either one of those is too narrow to give the truth its due. This is what it amounts to me. I think some people have erroneously connected me with Lenny Bruce for one simple common denominator, and that is the use of profane language. I think everything else is really quite different. All comedians are interested in justice. It seems to me that the whole reason for standing up and screaming even about your mother-in-law or about crabgrass or kids today is justice. You're looking to square the world, to make the world make sense to you. You're trying to figure out this world and so you give a twisted version of it to people because the version you're getting through your eyes doesn't suit you. So you say, look at this, I can do this with it. So all comedians try to do that. Lenny and I had this language in common, and he was the first one to make language an issue, and he suffered for it. I was the first one to make a language an issue and to succeed from it. Those are differences rooted in a similarity. And the other thing we had similarly was that we knew him, Jack and I knew him in our formative years, and Brenda and I kept Brenda and I kept up the acquaintanceship. That's all it really ever amounted to. We knew his mother and liked Sally, and we saw her a lot, and occasionally we'd run into Lenny. He was very hard to communicate with, so it would be a quick hello, and that's all. Obviously, I was very influenced by his approach to comedy, as I was with Mort Saul's, because I was in my formative stage, and I was a rebel at heart and an anti-authoritarian at a time when they were succeeding by taking those positions. So that was the extent of the influence. Everything else is open to the listener and to the subjective mind to say, well, I like this better, I think he does that better, he did this more, he did that more.
Comedy performers are usually labeled to categorize the particular kind of comedy they do: a social satirist, stand-up comedian, character comedian, physical comedian. In a 1978 interview, you said, quote, "After a while I came to realize that I really am a writer who can perform his own work." Do you still see yourself in that same way?
Oh yeah. The greatest joy to me is in finding and forming the ideas into material. The performing is very gratifying, and it's the end of the process, and it's wonderful that I get out there and I don't have someone else distorting what I write or editing my words. But the joy, the glee that comes from finding something and saying, oh, isn't that fabulous? What a great thing. No one else seems to have noticed that. And then to say it your way.
The interesting psyche about that, and having talked with Neil Simon and talking about this kind of thing many, many times, he had absolutely, his thrill is to stand in the back and watch the actors
Yeah.
say his words,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and agonize because a line didn't work, and not
Yeah.
wait to be able to go back to be able to change it,
Right.
but never having the need
Yeah.
to get up and do it himself.
My need to get up there, as you know from the earlier talk we had, preceded everything. My need to get up and show off and be applauded for it. This great discovery I made later was when my acting ideas were stalled there in that 67, 68, 69 period, when I started to do a few things, That Girl and a movie with Doris Day, I found I didn't slide right into acting automatically. It wasn't automatic. I was afraid of it. I didn't like it. I had no confidence there, and it scared me, and I pulled back from it, and that's what forced me to continue as a comedian, and that's what allowed for me to discover this ability that I have to turn out what's now 14 albums and 7.5 hours of HBO show, that I could actually produce that stuff and that it gets better. That's what I had no idea about when I was a young man.
One of the routines that you're famous for is the 7 words you can
Yeah.
never say on TV. Would it be possible to give us a step-by-step description of how that developed?
Well, when I knew, when I got to this transitional stage, the Las Vegas stuff was just one of a series of incidents that occurred over a 2-year period. See, as I told you, I was doing this act in good nightclubs in Las Vegas and on mainstream television shows, and I had positioned myself exactly where I wanted to, which is a little against type. And don't forget, my type was rebel, anti-authority, coming out of coffee houses, confrontational material. Now I go against type, and I start learning how to be just cute and clever and nice, and don't say too much, just give them what they want. And I learned that, and it brings me along beautifully in nightclubs and on television. But the acting thing didn't become automatic. The next step wasn't there for me. So I began to get dissatisfied then, because I was using, I see it now, I was using this mainstream persona and facade to gain my end, which was acting. Get in the movies. This will get me to the movies. Play the game with these people, it'll get me in the movies. Get to the movie thing, find out, hey, that's not automatic. I can't just have that. I don't like that so much. Well, I better get in touch with the comedian I am. And that comedian was, again, this person who says, well, fuck you can't do that, and you bastards, look what you're doing here. So I began to change in 69, 70, 71. By 71, it was complete. That's when I began to experiment with acid. I had been a pot smoker most of my life, which fed into that attitude of mine, that antisocial attitude. But I began to experiment with acid, and what the acid did, which is done for many people, was to spring me past a frontier, to artificially get me to the next step, which might have or might not have happened anyway in my life, depending on what the circumstances were. The acid pushed me over to see that, hey, I'm wasting my time with these people. I don't really like them. I'm sort of entertaining the enemy. They're kind of a safe, play it safe, middle class audience, and I'm playing it safe with them. And I feel differently inside. Let me get some of this out of me. So I go through this transitional stage, and I let it happen in front of the public. I kept doing shows. I kept doing Steve Allen, Della Reese, Virginia Graham, all these syndicated shows. Kept doing them. The beard kept growing. The hair got longer. The material became a little more daring. And I began to say, okay, great. This is where I want to be. Now I got to go to the colleges. They fired me out of Vegas. They fired me out of these places. They don't want me. I don't want them. I'll go to the colleges. That's where my audience is. So in making that transition, I get a record contract with Little David. And I decide that the first album should show the transition. So I call it FM and AM, which is to indicate that I'm becoming an FM comedian after being an AM comedian for a while, that I'm getting more daring, I'm getting down with the people. So that album showed that, and on it, on the FM side, it had a piece called Shoot, which was a takeoff about the euphemism shoot for the word shit. I call it Shoot. Shoot is just shit with 2 O's, or shoot is shit with glasses on. And I did a whole routine about how harmless the word shit is and how we use it mostly metaphorically. Get that shit out of here. I'm not going to take that shit anymore. What do you think that shit's for? What kind of shit are you giving me? And so that led then the next step on the next album to the 7 words. And what I wanted to do there was to lay the words out so that people would understand that my feeling about them was that they are only words, and they're only powerful in as much as you attach something to them, that you give them the power. If the person who says them has an evil motive, then the words indeed are instruments of evil. But if they're just lying on a page all by themselves, they're harmless. So that was the reason for wanting to spell them out and desensitize them.
You just opened up a whole new area for me. If that was your motivation, that seems to have stuck with a whole generation of people, young people who have grown up feeling basically the same way toward those words because they use them in everyday expressions, don't seem to feel that they are taboo in any sense of the word,
Right.
and that's fascinating. You've opened up a whole new area for me.
Great.
Yeah.
Two things about those words, too, that are interesting peripherally. Sometimes just to make the opposition, to make my point more tellingly to an opponent on this issue, although he's never there, this is a theoretical opponent, I will say, when I was growing up, I was taught to respect three groups of people. I was taught to respect policemen, respect military men, and respect professional athletes. And you know the language those three groups use. So what can be wrong with these words? And the other thing is, with my daughter, I taught her, I said, these words, other people give them power, so you must respect other people's reasons. If a person doesn't like that language, you don't have the right to use it in front of them. The words have the potential to be impolite or rude, so you must be careful how and when you use them, but they'll never hurt you.
On an HBO special that you did a routine that you called List of People I Can Do Without.
Yeah.
Wonderful, huh?
Yeah.
There were 25 jokes in it.
Yeah.
I counted them,
Yeah.
George. One-liners that you did one right
Series,
after the
yeah.
other. In order to get those 25 jokes that are successful, how many did you have to write to get those 25?
I had about 40 of them, or 50 of them, that I toyed around with. This is one of the few pieces that you have to write and memorize and do. It's not one you can say, well, here's some good ideas, and I'll work on them out there on stage. So this was one that got written out, and there were maybe 40 or 50 of them, and there were maybe 29 or 30 that made it to the stage and that got pared down to around 25. And even the ones that stayed got better and better, because I would find a better adjective. Like one of the ones that I originally was doing, it wound up being anyone who pays for vaginal jelly with an Exxon credit card. Well, originally, and that has such balance, and that's just got a nice rhythm to it. Anyone who pays for vaginal jelly with an Exxon credit card. And it makes you think about oil versus, vaginas, which is a strange sort of a juxtaposition. Originally, that one was just anyone who buys contraceptives with a credit card. And I can't believe that I had the courage just to say it that way at one point. But at one point, it was that dull.
Generally speaking, is there a usual percentage of jokes that you have to write in order to get the final few that do work?
Well, not so as I could put my finger on that, because I have a varied palette. There are a lot of different kind of things I do. Larry. One of them is what I call lists, like that one. I love to get into, sometimes sheer volume, I think, is another element in comedy, when you just continue so far. I had a thing at the end of one show which was called Things to Watch Out For. And the first 10 or so of them don't mean much, but they become waves. When you get to the 20th one, there's a wave of laughter. When you get to the 40th one, there's another, and it keeps going. So I have lists, I have language analysis, I have stuff about, observational stuff about your shoes and your car and driving and stuff. And some of them are so different from each other that I couldn't answer that question too well. I'd say about 1.5. I'd say about half again as much as you need, and it comes down.
Well, that's a fantastic average. You know that a lot of comedy writers would give their left arm to be able to create that well. The usual average, I must tell you, is about 3 out of 5 that work. How did you decide to place them in the sequence that you did?
Well, this sounds immodest, or could. There's just a natural feeling for that. There's just something that, there's some of this that you don't have to do consciously. I believe the subconscious, I know this is pretty much a theory that's held in respectable circles, that the subconscious does a lot of the work for us. And all we really do occasionally is to skim off the stuff that rises to the top. Say, oh, this will be nice. Look here, the potatoes floated up this time. We'll have some potatoes today. Here's some corn. Wonderful. And meanwhile, the thing is cooking down there, cooking away all the time. And you're constantly feeding it with impressions. I do keep those files. I keep files of sometimes they're finished jokes. They're a one-line finished thing. Other times they're just things I'm noticing. Something I noticed. Media words, the words they use that we never use in conversation. So-and-so is spearheading a drive. There's a probe going on. Prices either skyrocket or plummet, or they nosedive or they soar. And as I notice patterns, I'm copying them down all the time. Now, besides putting them in that file, they're in here too. So that two things happen. And then when I look back in there to get things out for a specific assignment, like I want to do, I'm forced to read the other things over, and they go through again. And they're changed a little. Another molecule is added. And they become, and then suddenly you'll see the connection between two totally unrelated things in different folders, and something bigger happens. So I'm a skimmer and a noticer, and I make the notes. I don't press. I very rarely sit down there and say, It's more like,
So you could have originally taken those 30, 40, 50 at the time and gone out on stage and did them and found that some were absolutely getting nothing, and
Yes.
you pulled them, tossed them,
Yeah.
and slowly but surely what you're saying is that it all fell into place.
that's right. Yeah, it's more of a field experiment rather than a laboratory experiment.
On that particular special, you also did a hunk on politics. We're talking about the one, that particular HBO special.
Yeah,
And that seems to be a subject you have a lot of fun with.
I'm back into it much stronger than ever now.
Really?
This current show I'm doing, I have about 35 minutes. Some of it's highly confrontational.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, I've tried to look at it because it was gone for so long. From about 1975 through about I don't know, let's just say 5 or 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. I had this emphasis more on the mundane. It was as if I needed time. I was sort of getting well. The family was getting well. Brenda and I were both recovering from substance abuses of various kinds, and I had a heart attack in '82, and I had things that. It was like a breathing in period. I always say, everything can't be constantly on an upswing. Nature shows you there's inhale and there's exhale. There's black, white, night, day, left, right, male, female, north, south. There's opposites. Everything has an opposite. So if you succeed very wildly for a while, you got to then breathe in. You got to take your time. So I had this period. Other people would call it his career was going in the shit house. That's the other way of looking at it. I don't look at it that way. I was drifting on a plateau. I had no direction. That's fair. Now I notice I'm getting this anger again. I'm getting this anger out of me again. And that's about what it amounts to. I've looked back over this year and I thought, well, what suddenly started this political stuff coming up again? Because there's more of it in the show now. And I realized that this is true. A person of good intelligence and of sensitivity cannot exist in this society very long without having some anger about the inequality, and it's not just a bleeding heart, knee-jerk liberal kind of a thing. It is just a normal human reaction to a nonsensical set of values where we have cinnamon-flavored dental floss, and there are people sleeping in the streets. So that anger, fuels the comic who looks for contrasts and looks for ironies, and then those things just become product.
You also love to use the English language as joke material, colloquialisms, cliches, idioms, slang expressions. Does a comedian have to have a love of language or an especially large vocabulary in order to perform his craft?
No, the nice thing about comedy is that there are so many different ways to achieve the goal of laughter. Laughter is a very unusual reflex, as you've probably looked into this on your own, and you know that laughter is one of the few reflexes that can be evoked both physically and mentally. We can make a person laugh by giving them a mental image of something funny, or we can tickle that person and evoke the same physical characteristics. The same thing happens to the heart rate, the breathing rate, and the endorphins in the brain. It's a healing art, comedy. It has power to transform people, even in the short term and in the long term. I believe that. And scientists are looking into it more. It was always considered too frivolous to look into. But because it has this mystic nature about it, so to speak, it's interesting that there are so many ways to achieve it. There are the people like the guys who came out of those nightclubs in the 40s, the tumblers from the mountains, guys that could just stand up there and there was very little intellectual content in any of that. It was a limited kind of a vocabulary, but it was
Mother-in-law
funny.
jokes or stuff, whatever.
But funny as hell because the perspective was there, and the surprise. Comedy always leads you down one direction and then grabs you and pulls you in the other direction. So how you achieve that? Oh, a million different ways. Carol Burnett probably doesn't write, I don't know this for a fact, but probably doesn't write a lot of comedy material over the years, gets up there and takes these sketches, adds her body to it and her sensibilities, and all these wonderful things happen. Mort Saul, very little movement on the stage. No different voices, no different faces, no bodily stuff, just the intellect at work, pointing out ironies. Now I combine a lot of things. I'm very fortunate, and I consider myself lucky that I can use my body in my work, I can use my voice, I get to write these ideas, I can look for delicate things that are a little like lace, and then I can look for something like a couple of ash cans to throw at a wall, because that gets my effect too.
So the vocabulary
It's not a necessity, obviously.
not a necessity.
No.
It helps, or it has been a mainstay for George Carlin.
It helps when you're doing delicate things. When you're doing something that has a fragile framework to it, it helps to be able to get very nice and precise with your language, because then, again, you're leading them somewhere, and then, boom, you pull the rug out.
Do you count the number of times that you try out a new joke before it makes the cut?
No. There's no math involved at all. It's all instinct.
Do you try out new material every time you perform?
I run into periods when I give myself more, when I'm less hard on myself. I'll float. Sometimes I'll float for 3 or 4 months and not press. Just let things evolve, because they're always changing a little. Sometimes, people say, well, do you improvise a lot? I say, no, it's all set stuff. The newer it is, the more improvisation is in it. But as I get to things I like, they stay, and I write them down. I listen to shows. I tape every show. I don't listen to every show. But if there's something in it that I want to listen to, I'll make a note the night of the show, something in names, and I'll listen to that the next day. I'll find a whole new joke, or an improvement on an old joke, and it's a slow process of just fix a little here, fix a little there, fix a little here, fix a little there. Over a 6-month period, the piece sounds 50% different, and it's tighter, it's more muscular, it's more economical. Everything about it is working better, because little by little, things have happened on given nights.
Doesn't that luxury really come from security or confidence,
Sure.
Success?
Yes.
It's not the kind of thing that you can do when you're starting out and frustrated or scared to death about making it for that particular show or for an agent out front. It takes a few years to be able to get to that point.
Absolutely. It takes, not only does it take the growth of your career and your success level to improve, but it also takes a certain amount of personal growth and change over years. I think there are a lot of guys who, I don't know about today now, but over the years of my memory, there have been guys who have been at the top, but are just loaded with insecurities and still really don't feel they got it nailed down at all, and they're just going, and they have a lot of writers and this and that, and they're just going from joke to joke, whereas I feel really in the last 10 years I've done a lot of work on myself that has made me just a much better instrument, and now my stuff is better, and then the external world likes me better, and I'm more secure. Those things all put together make me extremely confident.
Do you always try to finish the act with an extra strong routine, like the names of single bars? You kind of build to a big finish.
Yeah. I stuck that in because I had 2 minutes left on that show. Normally, for years and years, I've ended my show with the long list of impolite words. It's around 450 words, and I read it with a sort of a verbal ballet. I give it a lot of style and stuff, and I only need the paper a little bit. So usually I finish with that, kind of a tour de force of dirty language.
Those are the dirty words?
Yes, yeah. I call it the incomplete list of impolite words. But now lately I've been just doing selected portions of them because I finish on a thing that I call the rant, where I express a lot of anger and dissatisfaction about certain things in society. I do like to finish on an up, emotional, large note of some kind.
You mentioned before, what's the total number of hours that you've written material?
Well, I have 7.5 hours of HBO show under my belt. So that's 7.5 hours different. I probably have another 3.5 hours that never got on.
Okay, so if you needed to, you could do 11 hours
Yeah,
in
right.
a row. When you're booked to do a concert,
Yeah.
what is the criteria for choosing the specific material to do?
Well, I do a standard show, which is that year's show, and which will, after 18 months or a little more, become the next HBO show. This past time, I did about an hour. I did 55 minutes. Okay. I put out that HBO show. I put out an album of 45 minutes based on that stuff, leaving out 10 minutes here and there. And then I begin to drop that stuff from my act. I don't drop it all at once. It's impossible to put the next 45 minutes or hour.
But all the time during that 18-month period, you are working on new stuff.
Right. Right now, I have only in my act, out of that hour, about 20, 25 minutes of it left. But I'm doing an hour and a half, so that means I have about an hour new. At some point next November, I'll just do an hour for HBO, and then I'll begin to drop that and start putting in new stuff.
Very often when you deliver a joke, you add facial expressions or a gesture or sometimes change your voice. How do these techniques help to stimulate the audience reaction?
Well, they just intensify the message. You know, the thing you're going to say that you want them to react to has a palpable reality to it. It's a thought. You know, well, it's not quite palpable really, but it has it has an existence. It's a thought and a contrast you're trying to exchange from your mind to their mind, and sometimes you just assist the passage of the thought by even a subtle thing that you do with your body. It's all just. It's like in support of the idea. Those are physical manifestations of an abstract thing. The idea is abstract, but here's something physical to give it some form, to give it some life for you. And there's emotion transferred that way. The other thing is just a thought. It's just intellectual. But the body gives it emotion, gives it feeling, and that adds to their experience.
So that would be a description of the importance of body language.
Yes.
And in the success of performing comedy
Absolutely.
material.
Yes. It's an augmentation of the idea.
Do you sometimes choreograph your movements to correspond with certain jokes?
There are some jokes, there are some passages in material, put it that way. There are some short passages in a piece that I've found through trial and error are enhanced by a given body attitude or series of gestures. But that's experience that gives me that.
You remember Danny Kaye when he'd Gina, you could go see him 1,000 times. Gina, that was the same gesture, the same movement over and over.
Well, over a period of a year and a half or 2 years or even more when something just stays in my act for a long time, a piece of choreography will become quite as much a part of it as the words.
There are some critics who believe that you're a spokesman for every man in the United States, in that you make highly intelligent observations about our society, its customs and mores. You put them under a microscope and with comedic technique make them very funny. Is it your intent to make people think as well as laugh?
Well, it must be. I don't know. Yes, I like. No, I'm going to turn it around. It's more like this. I want them to laugh. I want them to be pleased with me. That means if they laugh at me, they'll be pleased with me. But the second thing that I seem to want is their respect for my mind. And that is the flip side of making them think, showing them that I can think. I think that has to do with some deep-seated feeling of inferiority at not finishing my education, because I know I got a good mind, and I knew it then when I left school. And it's this, it's this story you get in society, and we believe it, that, well, he had a good mind, but he didn't use it. You have a good mind, George, you're not using it. And we begin to believe that shit, because we're blank slates, basically, inside. So I think I have a need to show my intellect and to show it off and to say, look, see, like I didn't finish school, and I didn't go to college, but look at what I can do with my mind. I think that's in there. Although consciously I don't walk around with
It's an underlying thing.
It has to be a fuel to this thing.
George, when you use certain words like pussy, bullshit, fuck, asshole, cocksucker, they seem to evoke a big laugh, no question. Would the joke work just as well if the shock word wasn't included?
Some do, some absolutely do not. It has to do with the importance that that word plays in that particular context you're in. I have no way of giving examples of this, but it seems as if there are some contexts you can be speaking in where the joke is supreme and will win out over anything. And there are other contexts where the emotion, because those words are emotional and they provide, as you say, shock, and I want to say something about that in a minute too, but where emotion is involved in the message, more than intellect or in equal parts, those words serve a better purpose, and they seem more indispensable in a given joke. There are some where the laugh will be a little bit less, but the joke still survives. Well, I want to say that thing about that word shock, because as you and I know, over the years, and especially since Lenny Bruce, that word shock has become a bit of a conversational cliche when discussing that kind of comedy, where people will say, well, now aren't you just doing that for the shock value? Well, what those people don't realize is that comedy feeds on surprise. The whole element of comedy deals with surprising the person at the end. Shock is nothing but an intensified form of surprise. Now, if you're just standing up there to shock alone, there are things you can say that are much more shocking. You can start screaming things about baby rape and describe baby rape in a graphic way. That's shocking. These words serve, yes, as a heightened surprise. Therefore, they're on the edge of shock, but they are not for shock value. They are for embellishment. Not everyone in this society speaks that way, but a large percentage of people in this society use those words the same way in private life, to make an emphatic point. So
what was your reaction to Cosby getting after Eddie Murphy and then Jay Leno? Because Eddie uses so much of that in his act.
And there are degrees of use, and there are contexts, and I just think everything goes. I have a piece in my act where I talk about cancer now. Where I begin to talk about cancer. I take a sip of water and I talk about the carcinogens in the water, and I talk all about the cancer, and I get a few pretty good laughs in it, and then I have some lines where they don't laugh at all. And then I say to them, see, some people don't want you to talk about certain things. They're afraid if you don't say something, it'll go away. And then I say rape, because you can talk about rape, and I do a whole long thing on rape, and it's funny as hell. And I'm trying to show them that depending on the context of the joke, how you use it, what your intention is, the words can serve a different purpose than just to hurt people. And so, what am I getting back to? I think anything goes. And I think of Eddie Murphy, who is still young and unformed as a stand-up. I mean, he came out of sketch playing into comedy acting in movies, and his stand-up thing is raw still and unformed. He'll learn how he wants to temper it if he wants to, but it'll be his experience. Cosby can say what he wants, of course, but I think it's really prudish to come on like that. I think it's wonderful that Jay Leno never has to use a dirty word and everything, but I don't choose to do that, and I don't,
and each man has to do his own thing.
Absolutely, and I think imposing, even conversationally, imposing your own standards on someone else by pointing it out is unnecessary, and small-minded, I think.
When you do jokes about New Jersey,
in
New Jersey, the audience reacts well. How about when you do that same hunk in Connecticut, New York, or Pennsylvania?
Well, it's interesting because I've had there is a thing about the license. It works very well, of course, obviously, in those places, because to them, Jersey people are the enemy. When they see the Jersey license plate, there's all those jokes about Jersey drivers. But Jersey, it's wonderful. People have this wonderful capacity to want to make fun of themselves. I have noticed when you travel somewhere, if a local person is picking you up and taking you somewhere, or if you have reason to talk to a local person in Altoona or Minnesota or Raleigh or anywhere, they will tend to be self-effacing about their locale. They'll say, well, of course, what are you doing? What are you doing in Raleigh? Nothing ever happens in Raleigh. Oh, yeah, it's a Raleigh or something. They love to say these things, but if you attack their place, they'll spring to its defense. They have this wonderful two-sided thing.
That leads me, isn't it the tendency of people to laugh louder at people in another state or place than being able to laugh at themselves?
Yes, it generally is. When you're alone with them, they'll put down their own place. But in a group, they'll defend it. There's something about it. Yeah, it's like that thing from the old Mad magazine. No, I guess it was Crime Suspense Stories. You know, two guys will argue until a third guy comes along, and then if he argues with them, they'll band together. And then if the next block and the block and the block. So if the Russians in the United States were attacked by Martians, we'd be okay. So yeah, there is that. It's funny, and it's funny how prejudice is even within a group. You can't call a guy a nigger. I'm doing a thing on stage about this too, about these words, wop, nigger, spig, kike, and all that. And you can't call a guy a nigger if you're not one. But if you are one, hey, that's, you know, then it becomes a term of opprobrium within their group. It means a lesser black guy. Jews are like that. I heard about a Jewish guy told me once, he said he was in an accident on the Long Island Expressway, and the guy says, "You're lucky you're not a Syrian Jew, you fuck, because I would have," you know, even within within any group, they have lesser people.
Or that they think of as lesser people.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there any specific segment of the American population or a specific group that you feel is your best audience?
No, I like my cross-section. I've been around long enough that I have a pretty broad base now. We have kids as young as 12 in our audience, and I have people with gray hair in the same audience. Depending on the type of theater, there'll be more older people. Suburban theaters, there's more of them. Downtown, it's more of a younger crowd. College audiences they do not live up to their reputation, I find. Now, maybe more true of these days, or I maybe have become more sophisticated. I find them not as worldly. And it's obviously true. That's why they're there, to learn about the world. They're not as worldly. They're not as risk-taking. They'll give me a moan or a groan on some questionable piece of taste faster than a cross-section adult audience will. For instance, when I say I got a joke. Let's see, things you never see, things you never hear. I don't know which one it is, but I have a joke that just crosses the line of taste a little bit, and it's not a dirty word necessarily. It's something in life, you know. They'll go ooh, whereas the adult audience will accept it.
And I think that's also a sign of our times. I think the younger people growing up today, for some strange reason, have become much more sensitized to ethnic slurs or things for some strange reason.
Yeah.
How would you characterize the perfect audience for you?
Well, I couldn't say that. As long as they're people who have come there with a knowledge of who I am and the way I work, they're going to be the most open to what I do. I mean, that stands to reason. People don't pay whatever it is, $15 for a concert ticket, and wait 3 or 4 weeks for you to come into town unless they like you. So I just want my people. I don't like these. There are a few people who'll get beard up on the second show. It's the old story. They're not true hecklers because they don't say witty things. They just yell your name right in the middle of a wonderful piece you're doing. Some guy will yell, "Hey, George!" Yeah, but I just go past them. Sometimes I attack them head on.
Is there a region or a section of the United States that you like to play best?
Not really. It's true that the smaller the town or the more conservative the area, the more restraint people will have. But they're still my people from that section. If the given level of conservatism is higher, I'm still getting my share of that pie, which is less conservative than the people running the stores there. You know?
Is it possible that at a concert today you might be getting a husband and wife who may have seen you in college 15 years ago, and maybe are bringing a cousin who wasn't at school and said, "You got to see this guy"?
Yeah, and I'll get people who've only seen me on Carson, and but they've heard about the language and everything, but they've maybe never seen an HBO show or heard an album. And it's one of the most fascinating to me and one of the most satisfying things about having a long career is everybody who meets you wants to tell you when they saw you. I saw you at Ball State College in Muncie in 1971. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, and of course we do that in personal relationships too. The last time we met.
Yeah.
How would you describe your comedic point of view?
I started to answer some of that before by saying that I'm very spread out and that I do a lot of different kinds of things. Some of them socially, interesting and confrontational. Other things perfectly innocent about dogs and cats and the look on your doggy's face. And then there's anger, and then there's the language, the English language, and then there's the dirty language. So my comedic point of view is that the world is really a big straight line. Sometimes the world is actually a punchline. There are things that happen and you'll say, I can't believe that. Can you believe that? But most of the time, and then for that reason, you don't have to tilt your head because the world in that time is coming at you at 45-degree angle. So they're out of whack. But most of the world appears to be straight and level. So you got to tilt your head 45 degrees and your vision becomes, how can I take that reality, just distort it enough to suit my purposes, to show them that the craziness is there. It's just well disguised, folks. It looks, now that guy Dan Rather comes on, he looks normal, but check his eyes. The man is fucking nuts. Look in his eyes when he's talking to you. He doesn't have a clue what's going on, and he says, and Walter Cronkite says, and that's the way it is. And I say, and that's the way it jolly well fucking isn't, Walter. You know, so you have to do the switch sometimes, and that's my point of view, is to tilt my vision 45 degrees.
What is timing?
Timing is just the sense of the correct way an idea should be conveyed. I mean, we do it in ordinary conversation too. You know, you'll say something to somebody, and you'll have a significant pause that you feel is necessary for the rest of the idea, you know, to take hold on the other. We're always selling. We're always trying to convince or persuade in some way or another, even if it's just small talk. And so comedy's timing is important because there's all these people watching and you're on the tightrope, you know, and you're only as good as the last 5 jokes that might have bombed.
How does that differ from delivery?
Well, I think there's some overlap between those two words, delivery and timing, because timing is part of delivery. Delivery then has to do with a sense of context, I think, with knowing and owning, you know, the thing that you're trying to tell them, so that your cadence, your pitch, you know, all these things are just instinctive. No one thinks about them.
George Carlin has a great delivery. You know exactly when to hit the word. You know when to exactly catch up the audience with your phrasing, with your vocal pitch.
So then it's a sense of expression. It's a sense of a heightened sense of expression that makes it 10 or 20% better than just if you didn't have that.
Why do we associate sadness or tragedy or heartbreak with someone who brings so much happiness and pleasure to people?
Well, I guess it was true of a lot of the comedians who were interviewed all at the same time, that they all came out of, you know, bad situations. There is an anger that precedes comedy. There's an outrage at the base of it. And I guess it's natural to associate that sense of outrage and rage itself with some sort of ill beginnings or some sort of sadness. You know, crying and laughter are very close because they both produce tearing of the eyes, baring of the teeth, and a kind of a rhythmic expulsion of air that's involuntary. And so they're very, very close. I laughed until I cried. And all of the words associated with comedy have violence attached to them. Gag, slapstick, punchline, I killed them, I slaughtered them. If I don't kill them, I die. I died out there, but I was dying for a while, and then I killed them. And all of this stuff, there's something there that serious scholars should take a look at someday.
After researching the comedians I interviewed for my book on the great comedians, I came up with a theory that all people who go into professional comedy are driven to it because they, 1, come from poverty-stricken circumstances, 2, are members of a minority, and or 3, did not get enough love as a child. Does any of this hold true for George Carlin?
Well, the third one, not getting enough love, if you use the word love in its broadest sense to include attention, you know, love that's a perceived thing by a child. A child says, gee, you know, my dad's not here, I must have caused that. So there's a distorted perception of reality. But generally speaking, that third one would be closer to true. I got plenty of love from my mother, But I don't think I, as a youngster who wondered maybe where everybody was during the day, looked at it quite accurately, and I'm sure I confused attention for love.
How important is it for a comedian to be a curious person, or to have the ability to observe other people's behavior, or perhaps be a student of human nature?
Absolutely essential. I mean, it's one of the things without which you can't do it. You have to not only be actively interested and observant, you have to have the kind of nature which absorbs things in spite of your attention, in spite of the fact that you're looking for them. You just it's like a computer storing up images. You have to have a very wide range of things so you can make contrast.
Are there some basic requirements that are absolutely essential to be a comedian?
The ability to make someone laugh doesn't hurt. But it's such an elusive thing. I don't know what the requirements are. As I said, they're different. People who have different skills and different tools manage the same end result in spite of that. If the W.C. Fields can do it his way, and Fred Allen can do it his way, then there's can't.
Is it something you can study, that you can learn?
No, you can sharpen the skills that are involved. That's what I've done. I listened to my earlier work, and I know that now, 20 years later, I'm better at this because I've just allowed some habits to develop that were good for me. But you can study, you can probably learn some things not to do. And I often, when I'm sharpening a joke, when I notice an improvement in a joke and I see what's happened, why the joke is funnier with this word instead of that word, because there are more syllables or less syllables. For instance, 9. What was this one that came up about number 9 recently? I knew that 9 was the right one because 7 had 2 syllables in it and fucked it up. 8 is also another word, A-T-E, and that can confuse the mind momentarily. 10 wasn't right because 10 is a standard round figure. 9 was perfect. 11 was too many syllables. I knew 9 was right. And 12 was no good because it rhymed. 12 was like 12 bells. But 9, but there's just something innate, and you just learn that stuff.
Is a comedian born? Or
many of the prerequisites, let's call them, for want of a better word, many of the things, skills and talents, are innate and born in us. And other things, there are born comedians who don't become comedians. That's the perfect example of it. Guys who, come here, Joey, tell him that story about when you cracked into the lady. And this guy's the office clown. He's terrific. I just didn't turn that direction.
how much of the success of a comedian has to do with his ability to handle the day-to-day demands of being a businessman?
Success meaning the actual... give me the question in a slightly different form.
Well, to be a success in show business, you have to be somewhat of a business person.
Yeah, or you have to have someone you can trust who's sharp. I'm lucky now in this stage of my life. I have someone like that. I had some bad experiences with business people, and I was never business oriented, and I didn't even have the kind of the chutzpah to confront a person and say, hey, what's going on here? That was foreign to my nature. That's not true anymore, and now I have someone where I don't have to worry a lot about it, just a good standard relationship. I'd say you either have to be a good business person in any form of show business success, or you have to find someone trustworthy with a good mind. Good heart, good mind, they're hard to find.
How has comedy changed since you first started?
Well, comedy's changed as a reflection of how society has changed. When I was growing up, the comedians, their basic outlets were, burlesque was just ending, vaudeville had ended. So these guys had moved into radio and movies. Television came along and became a form of radio. So you had these two broadcast media plus movies. Comedy concerts were unknown. Nightclubs were still in form. So what's happened is that the area of expression has changed. The forums have changed. We still have television and movies. We don't have radio anymore. We don't have nightclubs really. But now we have cable television, which is an adjunct to TV. We have concerts and we have records. So that's one thing. The comedy itself has only changed as a result of people's tolerance for ideas changing. Since the Second World War, the country has lost a lot of its innocence. Since the 60s and the, quote, sexual revolution the counterculture, people's capacity to absorb ideas that are outside their experience is better. Television has made people more homogenous, so there's a changed public, and therefore what comes out of the members of that public as they stand up on stage, they know they can get away with more, I'll call it that, or they know they can cross greater lines. There's been a greater crossing of lines since.
Young performers need encouragement.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to someone just getting started, George?
I tell them, you can't do comedy without an audience. You got to get up in front of people every day of your life. Every night that you can possibly find an audience, 4 nights a week, whatever you can handle. Get out there and be doing your stuff, because you'll never learn who you are. You'll never learn your own comic identity, much less will the material take shape and get better and better. Nor will you learn how to polish. You got to be in front of people. It's one of the few things you can't do. You can sing alone, you can play the violin alone. You can't do comedy alone.
George?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Good, yeah, it's been fun. I like that.
Thank you.
I always learn a few things myself, about my process.